For the viewers who may not recognize you, could you let them know who you are, where you're from, and definitely what do you do?
Sure. I'm Nancy Sherman. I'm a titled Distinguished University Professor at Georgetown of Philosophy, and I work on ancient ethics, Stoicism. Most recently, I'm writing a book on Aristotelian ethics for the lay public, and I've worked a lot on military ethics and moral psychology of going to war and coming home. It gives you some sense.
Wow, okay. Yeah, that's really amazing. I take my hat off to you. Now I can ask you this. When did you develop this passion for philosophy? Is this something you've always been interested in, or did you get into it later in life?
No, I'd say a process of elimination. I started college thinking, what makes us human? And that took me to an anthropology course. Anthropos means human in Greek. At any rate, I discovered I was looking at bones, fossils, and and that wasn't interesting. So then I moved to psychology with my question. And when I was in college, we were running rats, looking at their pleasure centers. And I didn't find that particularly interesting, at least the way it was done where I went to school at Bryn Mawr. And then I happened into philosophy. And I thought, man, maybe this is the best place where I can answer some of my questions. So it was a bit of a process of elimination and a fair bit of stumbling.
Wow, okay, okay. You had mentioned the book that you're currently working on. If you could speak a little bit more about that, and I would like to know for the viewers as well, why are people like Aristotle and also Greek and Roman philosophy, how is that stuff still relevant today, and how can we use it and empower us?
Well, great. So there's been a real renaissance of interest in thinking about the ancients, and especially the ancient Greek and Roman philosophers. And as some may know, Stoicism has had a huge following of late, modern Stoicism, partly, I think, from the idea that you can somehow use the word empower, but empower yourself, that it's a bit of a self-help philosophy. I've critiqued a fair bit of that because I don't think it's just self-help. I think it's about us help, you might say, how you think of ourselves collectively and our responsibilities to each other. But Aristotle's the real love, and always has been, as I've been doing ancient philosophy. And so I'm going back to something I did a long time ago. But as I rethink Aristotle and reread most of his corpus, it's just remarkably relevant. He talks about the importance of connecting to nature. He was a marine biologist and many things, in addition to a logician and a moral philosopher and a metaphysician, someone who studied the being of the world. But he was interested, so how we connect to nature, how we connect to each other through stable friendships and not have too many, so that we don't dilute our sense of who is our friend, which I think we're really subject to doing of late with social media connections and the ease of calling people friends without really even knowing who they are or where they come from. And he talks a lot about the components of well-being that not only include living with others who have good characters, but learning from them and kind of improving your own character. So, and I should mention one other thing that I'm thinking about a lot right now, and that is, unlike the Stoics, he says, look, you can't avoid vulnerability. You can't avoid luck or tragedy or loss. This is the terrain of humanity. And so we shouldn't try to make ourselves inured to it or impervious to it. We're not invincible. And so we really have to think of ways that we can face vulnerability when it comes, losses, mourn, not forget about mourning or grieving, which the Stoics sometimes encourage us to do. How we can enhance our friendships, aware that those we love the most, we stand to lose and suffer the most from their loss. So I think Aristotle is remarkably relevant right now. I could go on, but that's the gist of it. He also, by the way, talks a fair bit about athletics and athletic training, and the kind of diet you might need, and and how you personalize it, and also that life is about not quiescence or calm, but it is action. You engage in the world all the time. You make choices, and so we're as if we're on a stage. We are actors. I don't mean make believe actors, but I mean we live in a world constantly changing, and we have to make choices. And our trials are all the culminations of our actions that make us who we are, and our character, and what kind of characters we have. A long answer to your simple question.
I appreciate you taking the time to break that down. You're definitely right. I agree. Now I can ask you, I see one of your books in the background, The Stoic Wisdom, and I would
Mm,
like to know how long does it take for you to, I guess, write and put out a project like that?
a long time. So I'm not one of these, not a novelist who can pull one out every year by any means. So Stoic Wisdom, I'm trying to remember, I'm looking at my, came out, here it is, it came out in 2021. I think the book before that was maybe 2015. After War, one of my books on coming home from war and war trauma, the moral injuries of war. I started working on this current book in the last spring, and I hope to have a complete manuscript by August. So that's a year of production, or a year and a half of production. And then, of course, there's everything that happens on a publisher's side, which could take a good year or so to get it through the press. A long time. It's not like writing a blog.
Okay, okay. You had mentioned one of your books, After War. If you could speak about the inspiration behind that book, but also your experience. I was looking online. You got a chance to advise the Army and the Marine Corps and talk about different things like mental health and PTSD. If you could speak about that a little bit.
Sure. So I ended up about a long time ago, several decades ago, I ended up at the Naval Academy, United States Naval Academy. So they train Marines and sailors for service. And it was in part because of a cheating scandal. I teach ethics. And so I was brought in to set up an ethics course, which is still running actually, at the Naval Academy. And, I was flanked side by side with admirals and then Marine generals who really wanted to learn some of these issues. That was before we got engaged in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. We Americans had just come back from the first Gulf War, and it was prior to 9/11. And then I returned to Georgetown. Well, I wrote a book called Stoic Warriors. It came out of my experience teaching at the Naval Academy. Then 9/11 happened. And when I got back to Georgetown after a break at the Naval Academy, I had a number of students, quite a number of students, who were either officers returning from war. One of my PhDs was an officer who became a colonel and was an attaché in Kuwait. And I had young Marines who had not yet gone to college, but were returning from really, really difficult battles, losing a lot of their buddies, not sure if their actions were just, their own actions were just, if they were according to the laws of war, but feeling really morally torn, morally shattered in some ways by what they did, what they had to do, and what they left undone. So I really wanted to help those service members come home. I wanted to help them to integrate. I wanted to get us civilians out of our bunkers and be able to talk to service members and not just on an airplane or an airport say thank you for your service. A very kind of pro forma performance and act, and one that service members don't always appreciate because it sort of is a pat, almost dismissive kind of exchange. So I started interviewing service members whom I knew, who I taught, who felt the moral anguish of war. And I tried to think hard about moral injuries that service members, civilians, those attached to service members, those left behind, experience. And it was very difficult work, but rewarding. And, you know, I was just in a conference call the other day, and there were some clinicians on hand who work with veterans. And some of them said, you know, some of my veterans just come in with Nancy Sherman's book after war, and they say, she heard me, I'm heard, I'm understood, this is me. And so I guess that's the greatest tribute of that work, that I've allowed service members, not in a clinical setting, but in a more in the classroom and in conversations where they felt safe and trusted, to talk about their wars and their the moral compromises, and in a longitudinal way. How much, you know, many came home very, very disillusioned with the wars they were fighting, and the battles in various places that seemed to have been won but really weren't because they come undone. And you know, and some looked at Ukraine and even went back to Ukraine to see how they could help in a war they thought maybe more just. Complicated. So I'm looking at the moral anguish that those who are engaged in war carry with them, a kind of PTSD, but not triggered by fear or life threat circumstances, but rather by circumstances that seem to in some way become a compromise of their own moral compass, or at least hard to fit in with their civilian sense of morality.
Okay. Now I would like to know this. Since that book was in 2015 and it's 2025 post COVID, you hear more people having a conversation about mental health and PTSD and stress and anxiety. By you actually being involved, have you seen a significant change with maybe people being more open to talk about it or get help or even understanding, you know, what the soldiers may have went through or are still going through?
Good question. Great question. It's hard to say because I'm not doing data collection, so it's more anecdotal. I definitely think there's we have a mental health crisis in the sense that there's still a great stigma attached to seeking help. In my classroom yesterday, I brought in a person at Georgetown, a woman who's the sexual assault and harassment counselor. And so she talked to individuals about all aspects of well-being, healthy and unhealthy social connections. I, in my classroom, sometimes talk about social media and have students tell me, do they feel more or less connected to other persons when it's virtual and not in person, face to face, you know, around a kitchen table, etc. So I don't know, and specifically the uptick in people seeking therapeutic help or the change in the dialogue. I will say there are real barriers. A lot of insurance plans do not cover mental health or cover it sufficiently, or think it's only covered for a 15 or 20-minute session for seven sessions. This is a constant issue, even with the Veterans Administration, how to give adequate care when the clinical times allotted may be very, very brief. Personally, I try to break down some of the barriers. Right now, there's a lot of anxiety in the classroom, a lot of fear, given what's happening in the States. And so there's a sense of, are you a safe person to talk to? And I hope I am. And I try to interact with my students, meet them where they are, and invite conversations, refer them for mental health if they need it, and just chat, sort of like an elder, hopefully a wise elder.
Okay, I definitely understand. Now I can ask you, you had mentioned like the social media, and I can ask you this, the technology and AI. How has it affected the work that you have been doing from philosophy to, teaching? Because you've been doing it for quite a few years. Has it been an easy or a difficult transition for you, and have you been able to utilize it effectively?
I'd say at the moment, I'm skittish about AI, so I'm not using it effectively. Uh, I um, I have a largish class, and I'm pretty certain if I assign a paper to my students, they will, most of them, when they're honest with me, they'll say, "I'll consult AI." And there are, let's call them anti-plagiar or plagiarism checks out there, but I haven't played with them enough to know which ones are effective. And I don't want to send a half of a class to an honor board. Or I don't particularly want to assign a assignment, which is produce a paper through AI and then critique it, which is the way some go. So what I've done, so I've sort of dodged the bullet for the moment. And given that I produce, I have a lecture with a lot of material, and students are responsible for a lot of material, I've been giving tests in class, but through what we call a lockdown browser. They can't browse, or it's a version of they can't have open book tests. Everything just gets locked down as a result of a certain software fix that we use in the classroom. And my students seem to actually like it. They like to not have the anxiety of a paper, 5-page paper that they take home and have to produce in 2 weeks. These are first year, second year students. These aren't graduate students or seniors. And they like over and done, study hard and do it more like you would do a math class or a chemistry class. So that's how I'm experimenting. I've never in my life given so many tests or even a final exam. I usually concentrate on writing, since that's what I do a lot of, and try to give them feedback on writing. But right now I'm not doing that. So as I say, skirted the issue.
Okay. I appreciate you sharing that. Now I have to ask you, with the books that you have written and the work that you have done, you cover a lot of interesting stuff. Have you ever considered doing a documentary or even a film about, the work that you've done?
I've been on certain, segments with teaching, televised segments for various folks, and I've been on various news stories where I've been interviewed because of my work with veterans and service members, and also my work in ancient philosophy. But I haven't itself been the subject of a documentary. I'm not sure I'd be that interesting, but that's for you to tell me.
Yeah, definitely. You've done some amazing work. So we're about 20 minutes in. So I just want to thank you again for stopping by. I understand you have a very, very busy schedule, and I really appreciate everything that you're doing. And I definitely look forward to the book that you have coming out as well.
Oh, that's good. It's called How to Have a Soul, Ancient, what Aristotle teaches us about um, Enduring Happiness.
Now, is it a website that you have, or would it just be on Amazon or Google
Well,
Books?
it
Or
will eventually be on Amazon. It's going to come out with Yale University Press. But all of my other books, and I think I've written about 5 or 6, they all are available online. I have a website, nancysherman.com, so you can see what the books are, but there are a lot of them out there in philosophy. And, lots of articles and videos as well on my website, nancysherman.com, and podcasts too.